institutions, workers and employers, organizations, colleagues, friends, welcome and thank you for joining to the second webinar in which we will present ILO's resource package, extension of social security to workers in informal economy. The most comprehensive tool in this package is a handbook, Extending Social Security to Workers in Informal Economy, Lessons from International Experience. And this handbook is now available in Russian. This is why we wanted to talk about the tool and handbook with you today. And not only because the tool is available and is in Russian, but also because
И не только потому, что этот инструмент
now in the times of devising responses to COVID-19. A handbook is a living document. As we introduce more interventions worldwide and hopefully more intervention in our sub-region, handbook will be expanded to reflect new lessons learned and achievements made. So we hope that we will keep collaborating with you in designing, implementing and reflecting about approaches to extend social security to workers in informal economy and showing the results that will impact people's lives. As you know, this is now the second seminar in a series of discussions about social protection response to COVID in our sub-region. We are planning webinars presenting a tool for rapid assessment of situation of workers in informal economy, a webinar reviewing measures taken by the government in sub-region, and discussion about social protection financing. So please keep checking ILO Moscow office website for announcements. And of course, we will send you invitations to participate at webinars. I would like to convey apologies on behalf of Ms. Olga Koulaeva, the director of the Moscow ILO office, for not being able to join us today, although she very much wanted that, as she was invited to regional directors meeting, and this meeting takes precedent over the webinar. But Ms. Holud Alkaldi is with us today. She is a deputy director, and she will welcome you on behalf of Ms. Koulaeva. Holud, microphone and the screen are yours.
Oh, now you can hear me, but unfortunately I couldn't start my camera. So I really apologize. I tried, but it was not possible. Anyway, I will just say a few words and then I will leave you with the experts. So dear ILO constituents, colleagues working in UN country teams in Europe and Central Asia, experts and researchers, thank you for joining ILO organized webinar on extending social security coverage to workers in the informal economy. ILO estimates show that due to the impact of COVID pandemic and without any alternative income sources, lost labor income will result in an increase in relative poverty for informal workers and their families of more than 21 percentage points in upper middle income countries, almost 52 points in high income countries, and 56 points in lower and low income countries. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic calls not only for rapid and effective measures to enhance income security for workers in the informal economy, but also for well-designed medium and long-term measures that will enable inclusion of these workers into national social protection schemes. Likewise, there is a need to adjust the design and financing of national social protection systems to be able to respond to the needs of that population. In this context, a second webinar in a series of webinars dedicated to social protection response to COVID-19 is more than timely. Our colleagues from Social Protection Department will present a resource package on extending social security to workers in the informal economy. This package is a particular tool for policymakers, workers and employers organizations, and other wider stakeholders to develop viable options to support inclusion of informal workers in social protection systems. The main report presented in the package has been also translated into Russian language, and we hope you will find it useful in your daily work. The COVID pandemic has fully exposed the disadvantaged situation of many self-employed workers, workers in non-standard employment, those working in the informal economy who are not enrolled in social protection schemes. Extending social protection coverage to these workers is possible, as we will learn today from the experiences of some countries. We will also have an opportunity to discuss challenges and ways forward to this sub-region. With this, I would like to thank you for your participation and will leave you with you an interactive and interesting, useful discussion. And I hand over to you, Yasmina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Khulud. I see in the chat that maybe not everybody heard the introduction, but let's continue. And I hope that you can all hear now everything that is being said.
That's fine.
Now, let me introduce our resource persons today. Ms. Christina Baron, who is head of the Social Policy Unit in Social Protection Department in Geneva. Can we please see Christina so that we all know who is one of the masterminds behind the resource package?
We see Christina on screen.
Okay, great. And then, thank you, Nikita. And then we have Queen Anne again, who is a Social Protection Technical Officer in Social Protection Department, who's been working for many years in different countries in ILO's Bangkok region on hands-on on extending social security coverage. And we also have Finn Ko, who is a Social Protection Program Manager in ILO Cambodia. Finn is now implementing one of the projects in Cambodia on extension of social security coverage, and we will hear very up-to-date, real-time practical examples. And with us, we have Professor Nikita Lyutov, who is head of Department of Labor and Social Security Law at Kutafin Moscow State Law University. And he will walk us through some of the options for formalizing labor relations and expansion of social security in Russia, but also these examples are applicable for some other countries in our sub-region, and Professor Lyutov has experience and has been following up developments in a number of countries in the sub-region. So he will be able to give us a spot-on insights. So without further ado, please, Christina and Queen, we are looking forward to hearing what can the resource package offer to practitioners and policymakers.
Yeah, thank you very much, Khulud, and many thanks also to, many thanks to you, Yasmina, and many thanks also to Khulud for the very nice introduction, and also to all the colleagues in the Moscow office for organizing that translation, organizing this webinar, so that we have now the opportunity really to have a discussion on this important topic. I'm not sure, Marina, can you? I cannot see the presentation. can you share the screen, or would you prefer that I share it? I try to share it from here.
Christina, let me try to share it. You will say whether it's okay or not, okay?
Okay, yes, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So I think while waiting for, okay, I think it's coming up, and I hope that everyone can see it now. And I think now with the coronavirus crisis has really reminded us very painfully about the importance of extending social security coverage to all workers independently and regardless of the form of employment, so including all workers in dependent employment, but also for self-employed workers. And because we really know that this social protection mechanism is really critical, not just for the workers themselves, but also for society. Because I mean, we see now with all the economic and social devastation that that has hit many countries, that this is really critical. And not last to speak really of access to healthcare, which is a very important part of social protection, but also about the income security. And so we're very happy now that this resource package is now also available in Russian language. And as Yasmina has already set out, it's really a living document. And there are no kind of easy answers to the questions. It's really extending social security to those in the informal economy, or those in more general terms who are not yet covered. Is really something where there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. So it's really something that where every country has to see exactly what are the specific barriers and what are the specific solutions. But what we have tried in the handbook is really to share information in a systematic way about what countries have been doing and where countries have had successes in extending coverage. So to really have a resource for other countries to help them think about it and think about what are the specific challenges and what could be the solutions in every context. So if we could go to the next slide, please. And now with the COVID crisis, as I mentioned, it has really exposed in a very painful way the coverage gaps. And also as a reaction to the crisis, actually many countries have on an emergency basis either extended existing schemes, partly it is social insurance schemes, partly it is more on the social assistance side or universal benefits, or introduced new benefits to those who are not yet covered. And what we can see here on the map, and this comes out of a monitor that we keeping up at the ILO, and I'll have the link below. It's also available in Russian language. It really shows that I mean almost all countries in the world have taken those measures. And if you go to the monitor, you can see in more detail in which areas and what exactly countries have been doing. So I mean, it's good news to see these many responses, but what we don't know yet is to what extent this will really be sustained after the immediate crisis.
Как мы справимся с этим кризисом, особенно в силу того, что многие.
And so there are some fears that some countries might be forced actually to cut down after the immediate effect of the crisis, and will not be able to transform these kind of short-term and immediate measures into something which can be more sustainable. So the social protection is now at the crossroads, and it is now an opportunity for countries really to move forward and to make sure that those gaps in the social protection systems are being closed, so that countries are actually better prepared to face the future including a potential future crisis. And with that, I'm handing over to my colleague Quinn for some concrete examples. And Marina, if you could move to the next slide, please.
Hello, and welcome also from my side, and many thanks to the colleagues in Moscow who organized this webinar and who also coordinated the translation of the guidebook. Yes, so thanks to Christina also for the introduction. I will go a bit into detail on what countries have done actually to extend coverage to workers in the informal economy as part of the COVID-19 response. So we have observed various government measures. So in the area of health, countries like China, South Korea, and Thailand have taken measures to ensure that people, especially those who have been excluded from health coverage before, now have effective access to healthcare, including testing and also treatment. The crisis has also very much exposed the coverage gaps in sickness benefits for a lot of workers who are in the informal economy. That's why, for example, countries like Venezuela and Ecuador have provided sickness benefits to families, to workers and families in the formal and informal economy. Another area where someone says I cannot hear. I'm not sure if this applies to everyone.
No, we hear you.
Ah, okay. Okay, so another area where countries have done a huge amount of work is providing income support. This is obvious given the significant economic losses that workers in the informal economy have incurred due to the lockdown and containment measures. So where possible, this is channeled through existing schemes and programs. So for example, countries have increased the adequacy of their unemployment benefits. Thailand is an example. Others, such as Bahamas and Morocco, extend coverage to those who haven't been covered by existing schemes yet, including those in the informal economy. And yet others have introduced one-off payments. And this is mostly the case where countries do not have comprehensive systems in place which they could quickly scale up in this crisis. And there you see different approaches. For example, Togo targets only the informal sector. Hong Kong takes a more universal approach. And this also leads me to my next point, because in a lot of cases, countries have really struggled to identify workers in the informal economy and reach out to them, because before they were actually invisible to public policy. And so now in this crisis, reaching them is a big difficulty countries face. So what has been done in this area is countries have tried to use, for example, digital technologies. Thailand has, for example, used a mobile application to allow informal economy workers to register. And similarly, Brazil and India as well. And I think our colleague Finn will later go into much more detail with respect to the role of digital technologies. And where, for example, this hasn't been possible, countries have also tried to initiated partnerships with informal workers organizations to find a channel to actually channel the urgently needed income support to those workers. Some countries where we see very interesting initiatives are, for example, Mozambique and Cabo Verde, which use social security institutions as channels to provide their income support. And in fact, if these policies are well designed, they can actually also offer an opportunity to encourage workers to participate in the social insurance scheme. And this can also support formalization in the future. And finally, countries have coordinated social protection policies with other policies, suspension of loans, for example, or rents. Food, very important in countries where things are disrupted, are very important given the closure of schools and childcare facilities. And as a cross-cutting area, it's very important that all the stakeholders, all the relevant stakeholders, including those in the informal economy, are part of these policy measures and the recovery measures, because only then we can ensure that the needs of those workers are also addressed. And as Christina said, it's very early still to see whether these short-term crisis measures sustain, or whether they're integrated in long-term national social protection systems. But as Christina also said, this social protection is really at a crossroads now. Next slide, please. So COVID-19 comes on top of many major transformative changes in the world of work. So before the crisis was hitting our world, we had technological progress, and this has offered many opportunities, but also presented a lot of challenges to social protection systems.
Жизнь ввел и проблемы, но и облегчил нашу жизнь. Если вы подумаете о так называемой
opportunities for jobs, but also is associated or can be associated to more precarious employment. The green transition will create a lot of jobs, but it can also lead to jobs which will disappear. Demographic challenges is another topic which will affect our labor and social security, our labor markets and our social security systems. And despite strong economic growth before COVID-19, we have seen that income inequalities as well as gender inequalities still persist. And if all these structural challenges, which have existed before COVID-19, are not addressed in a more substantive way, the progress that we've made so far towards the SDGs and the realization of the human right to social security can be certainly reverted. Next slide, and I'm giving the floor to my colleague Christina. Back to Christina.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Quinn. And I'm very mindful about the time, so I'm just going through the next slides very, very quickly.
Oh yes, I need to put.
Yes, so as Quinn has mentioned, it is really critical in order to prepare our societies and our economies for the future. It's really important to close those gaps in the social protection systems. And this is not just a matter of human rights, and it's not just a matter of social justice, but it's also very much a matter of economic progress, because the social risks that social protection is addressing are as much contributing also to economic development as they are contributing to social justice and human rights. I'm not going to go into more details on that, because I think we need to move on to the next points. But I just wanted to make this point, and especially with regard to the self-employed, because these are a group of workers that are often face difficulties in accessing social protection. And especially for them also, the linkage between the economic and the social risks are very strong. So for them, whatever is a social risk is at the same time also a risk for their business. And I think many countries really need to invest much more in closing those coverage gaps for the self-employed. So if we move to the next Now let's maybe skip. No, let's stay on this one, and we skip the next one. let's do it that way. So I mean, when we look into informal employment, this is really I mean, we see a very diverse situation, and in different parts of the world, informal employment occurs in very different ways. In some parts of the world, this is more, we're talking more about undeclared work. To a large extent, we talk a lot about the situation of those who are self-employed. And there are a number of reasons and of factors that drive people into the informal economy or keep them in the informal economy. And in many cases, this is linked to the inability of the economy of creating enough formal jobs. Quite often it's related to low productivity. In many contexts, it can also be linked to the fact that the existing legal frameworks do not cover certain categories of workers. For example, domestic workers or agricultural workers are not covered in many cases, or sometimes they provide only for voluntary coverage rather than mandatory coverage. And we're going to come back to that, but this is something that kind of voluntary coverage quite often doesn't lead to a substantial extension of coverage. Quite often also the enforcement systems are not effective enough to ensure that all those who should be covered according to the law actually are covered. And but at the same time, it's also quite often linked to a lack of transparency and accountability of public institutions, and very much also linked to a lack of trust. So for many, and this is true for both on the employer side and on the worker side, quite often there's not necessarily a very close understanding or firm understanding of why social protection is so important, why social security is so important. And we see that very strongly now during the crisis, where people suddenly realize why it is so important to be covered. Not only with regard to health coverage, but also, for example, for sickness benefits or for unemployment benefits. This is now very present during this crisis, but it's important also to keep up that understanding also after the crisis. And that quite often it's also linked to a lack of workers' voice and representation. And in fact, between informality and social protection. So, I mean, the lack of social protection can be both a consequence and a cause of informality, because quite often also the lack of social protection, for example, the lack of unemployment benefits, also drives people and compels people to engage in the informal economy. And I think this is an important point to be mentioned. So I've already mentioned some of the barriers that keep workers out of, that keep people out of coverage. And what we're going to do now, and this is basically also the main objective of the handbook, is really to talk in a very practical way. What are the different mechanisms of trying to address those barriers and extending coverage to those who are currently not covered? So I'm skipping the next slide, and I'll hand over directly to Quinn for the following one.
Many thanks, Christina. I will try to keep myself a bit shorter this time. So as Christina said, in the guidebook really presents a wealth of country examples where you can see that actually there's no one-size-fits-all solution. So the solutions taken by countries really differ depending on their challenges. These are just some examples here on the slide, but if you go in the guidebook, you will see much more. And we would also very much appreciate if you could also, in case you know of some examples, get back to us after the webinar so that we can incorporate it into our next edition of the guidebook. So one measure which countries have done is, as Christina already mentioned, legal exclusion is one of the can be one of the barriers to social protection coverage. And then as a first important step, countries have therefore extended legal coverage to previously excluded groups such as agricultural workers in Tunisia, self-employed workers in Thailand, in Vietnam, domestic workers in South Africa, for example. But while this is a very crucial step, it may often not be sufficient to ensure that people have access to social protection benefits in reality. And to work on those more practical barriers, for example, administrative barriers, countries have tried to facilitate the access to administrative procedures for workers in the informal economy, especially, for example, for those living in rural and remote areas where it may be difficult to visit a social security office. So in these cases, setting up mobile social security offices or setting up online or mobile registration can be very useful. And another area where countries have done a lot is also information and awareness, because simply some workers may not be aware of the benefits they are entitled to. They may not know how they can register. So I remember one example from your region, which is Tajikistan, where the government raised public awareness about the consequences of informal employment and the risks. Very innovative approach, actually. So there was a mobile theater which traveled across the countries to actually raise awareness across the population on the importance of social protection and the importance of needing workers' representation. Another area is actually to develop an attractive benefit package, because in many cases, the benefit packages which are available may not meet the priority needs of workers in the informal economy. So I remember one example when I worked in Vietnam. So in Vietnam, for example, self-employed workers only have access to long-term benefits like pensions, and can only register to the voluntary scheme, whereas formal sector employees have access to a range of other short-term benefits such as maternity, unemployment. And in many cases, this alone, the fact that the benefit package actually doesn't meet the needs of workers, because the workers have very low incomes, so they rather care about their very priority needs and short-term needs. This may be a reason for them to not sign up. And then there are countries who, for example, have tried to adapt the schemes to the financial capacities of informal economy workers. As many workers in the informal economy have very low and very irregular incomes. So in many cases, this has been done by allowing for daily contributions. But not only this, some countries have used subsidies as a way to extend coverage to those who have very limited financial capacities. And lastly, compliance and incentives are really important, because in a lot of times the operational costs to be in the formal economy are quite high. So registration is quite high. What we know as red tape could also prevent workers from, and also economic units from joining the formal economy, and therefore also prevents workers from being enrolled. And lastly, of course, ensuring that the workers' representation. So in many countries, workers, representatives of informal economy workers have played a big role in pushing the agenda and also raising awareness and facilitating workers' access to social protection benefits. With that, we can move to the next slide, where we have drawn several key lessons learned of these country experiences. So what we've seen is that mandatory coverage as compared to voluntary coverage, for example, can really ensure broad coverage if measures are taken to subsidize or support those who have limited financial capacities to contribute. And as Christina said before, voluntary schemes have shown to be rather not successful due to a lot of issues, for instance, also small risk pools. Another fact is that it's not enough to provide people with legal access to social protection, but governments should also work in parallel on improving the quality of benefits and services. And this is also extremely important to build trust in the system, because if people feel they contribute to social insurance, but they don't get the benefits they need, or the benefits are not delivered, they will not participate. I mentioned the simplification of and streamlining of administration before. And another point we observed is the importance of an integrated, unified social protection system where, which really combines the non-contributory and contributory schemes in an integrated way. Creating separate schemes for informal economy workers may help to address their specific needs, but it can also pose a problem in terms of portability of benefits, especially because workers in the informal economy often change their jobs. So having separate schemes is quite difficult. And lastly, the importance of financing and fiscal space. And this is where also the role of social protection for the formalization process comes in. Because if we manage to extend social insurance to those who were previously uncovered, it can also help to mobilize additional financing in the long term and also help to broaden the fiscal space. And lastly, the importance of social dialogue. And I'm giving my colleague Christina the floor to maybe comment on some of my thoughts. And yeah, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Quinn. And being mindful of the time, I think we should maybe also kind of just conclude with this slide. But I think that the full presentation will then be available to everyone afterwards. I would just like to highlight, just complementing what Quinn has already mentioned. What is really important and critical now as we prepare for the future is really making sure that social protection systems in countries are really working well. And it's actually quite interesting because just last year, the International Labour Conference has adopted the Centenary Declaration for the Future of Work. And I think what they have adopted, although it was in pre-COVID times, but I think it's very relevant. And basically they have used 5 attributes for social protection systems. And I think this is very relevant for the discussion that we have today. So social protection systems should be universal, ensuring that everyone is covered, also everyone regardless of the type of employment he or she is in. So really finding ways of ensuring adapted coverage. It doesn't mean uniform coverage, but it means that everyone should be covered in a way that it's adapted to the situation. It's important to ensure comprehensive coverage, really, so that we have kind of coverage that really covers all the life risks that people might face. That coverage is adequate, and we've heard that very much also with regard to the question of having benefit packages that people need, because only then they will be also prepared to contribute to the financing, both through contributions or through taxes, which is also an important element. of that, because I think a big challenge is not only the fact that there might be an evasion when it comes to contributions, but also when it comes to taxes. And I think in that regard, and we've already mentioned the issue of trust, that is really a key element of building stronger social protection systems. And so with that, we're already at the fourth of these attributes, and this is really ensuring that social protection systems are sustainable and equitable when it comes to the financing. And finally, the last attribute is really that they should be adapted to the world of work, which means that they should be adapting to changing realities and really making sure that they provide the necessary protection that is needed. And I think with that, I'll close here. I can also, for those of you who might be interested in additional material, unfortunately for the time being, it's only available in English. But on the slide, you see an internet link to Informal Economy, socialprotection.org. And there we have collected a lot of material, including some additional briefs, including some videos. So I think that additional material, and maybe at a later stage, it might, we will also have the possibility of providing that in Russian language as well. And I think with that, I'll stop here, and I'm looking forward to your questions and the discussion. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Christina and Quinn. This was very useful, setting the scene and the framework within which each country has to think about extension of coverage. And as you both emphasized, there is not one solution that fits all. There are a number of details that have to be taken into account. However, the attributes to social protection and the experiences that you shared are actually valid for everyone. So with this, I see that two participants have questions to ask. And now we will open for a brief discussion of 5 to 7 minutes, and then we will go further. But then at the end, we can have wrap-up discussion combining all elements of the presentations that we heard today. I see two raised hands, and on my screen, Irina comes first with her question. So please, if you could ask a question rather than type it, so that we make it a bit more interactive. Please, Irina, go ahead.
I'm not sure Irina's microphone is switched on.
There were two raised hands. Now it's only one. So if you have any urgent questions now, please go ahead. Just try and unmute your microphone before you ask.
Ирина, да, включите микрофон, пожалуйста, перед тем, как разговаривать.
Если не получается включить микрофон, может быть, в чат напишите. Probably it's either no question or no possibility.
Oh, okay, I see something's coming in. Okay, there is a question from by Karim Tutenov. The income level of the population is closely related to labor activity. Today, the informal sector cannot gain access to formal employment due to rising unemployment. At the same time, there is an increase in manifestations of criminal nature. Question: will the ILO analyze? Will the ILO analyze the relationship of these three factors to the informal sector, the official unemployment rate, and the level of street crime?
Yes, would you like me to answer?
Please.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much for the question. And indeed, I mean, as you have mentioned, the situation in particular with regard to unemployment in many countries is extremely dire, especially now in times of crisis. And so the ILO has actually done a lot of also analysis with regard to the situation, and also, I mean, when it comes to the very short-term crisis responses, also has made available tools also for rapid assessments that can be useful in really helping countries in developing policy responses. With regard to the question with regard to crime, actually there is a recommendation that was adopted in 2015. It's the kind of the transition from the informal to the formal economy recommendation, and this has a very clear definition of what is considered as the informal economy, and it's also very clear in delineating workers in the informal economy as those who are not covered either by the law or by the practical application of the law from illegal activities. I think we have to be very clear that when we talk about informal employment, informal economy, we really need to be clear that this is really about protecting workers, but not about protecting illegal activities. I think that this needs to be, we need to be very, very clear, and I can really invite you to have a look at this recommendation, which addresses a lot of the different aspects of informal work, informal employment, and also when it comes to informal economic units in many countries, that has these definitions, but which also looks at the different dimensions, not just at the social security dimension, but also looks at the way, for example, the kind of the mechanisms for ensuring compliance with the regulations, and also the different mechanisms that exist with regard to supporting the transition of those in the informal economy into the formal economy. This is something that, depending on the country contexts and depending on the situation of individuals, it might not be possible to do that immediately. I mean, in some cases, when we talk about undeclared work, sometimes it might be possible to formalize at the same time as extending the coverage. But in many cases, this might not be possible. So there we talk more about a long-term process. But it should be clear that also the extension of protection to those in the informal economy should help with helping people to transition also to the formal economy, because I mean, this is really in order to make sure that their situation improves, but that there is also, when we look at the economy and the society as a whole, that there's really a situation that is sustainable and there's equitable. So back over to you. Thank you. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much, Christina. I will just add that in our sub-region, and now due to the crisis, we see more interest in discussing the issues of informality. Let's hope this interest sustains. And there are two countries where, or actually more countries, where we are trying to address some of these, some of the consequences of informality in a short term. But that obviously leads us into discussions about medium-term and longer-term solutions. So there are issues and that countries are trying to deal with. For example, Tajikistan was mentioned, and we are trying now to broaden the scope of involvement in Tajikistan related to informality. In Uzbekistan, we are also discussing with constituents different approaches. We see that Georgia is trying to expand coverage, at least temporary, with unemployment benefits to workers in informal economy. So there are lots of things are going on, and they're going on very quickly. So even documenting it takes a bit of time. But as I said, we are following up on what's going on, and we are trying to promote engagement in medium-term and longer-term solutions, both in terms of reflecting on practices and on exchange between countries of different practices and their impacts. And we are doing it also in a way that the topic is raised even from social protection perspective, from the perspective of design of employment policies. As you know, in some countries, these processes are ongoing, from the side of workers and employers organizations, but this will take time. Thank you. I think, are there any more questions? If not, we will think about our discussions, and we will return to a broader discussion towards the end. But now let us hear from Finn. Finn has his hands on in an ongoing intervention in Cambodia, where technologies are used to collect data needed to explore the position and situation of workers in informal economy, and to see how social security could be extended to them. Finn, is it enough to have data, or do we need to know what type of data we need that is going to help us to design well-founded, evidence-based policies?
Yeah, that is a great question to start and to frame the discussion. So, Marina, if you could please put up a slide for me, and I would run through a very quick presentation, share a little bit more, and then hopefully we could generate an interesting discussion after the presentation. So just to start with this presentation, what I'm going to do is share with you a kind of a personal story. The next slide, please. Next slide, yes. So this is where you basically find me after work, or at least before COVID-19. My then girlfriend and now wife will often text me at around 10, 11 p.m. asking if I'm on my way home. So my reply is always, last round of drinks. I'm heading back in 5 minutes. Of course, that never happens. And I'll be home 2 hours later, and I'll tell them something like, oh, there's no taxi back. I missed the last bus. The traffic was really slow. So she never really believed that, but because she had no way of proving it until WhatsApp and everyone comes up with live location. So now I have no way to telling my wife that I'm on my way home when my live location shows that I'm still in a pub drinking. So if you go to the next slide. So this is a problem. This is a problem for me, all right? But for social protection, this is an incredible opportunity, because the invisible workers, a lot of these informal workers, which we do not know about, or we have very little information about now, have a digital trace. 10 years ago, we would struggle to know how much an informal driver in Indonesia, or maybe a home baker in the Philippines, makes by selling cookies and cakes. Now, with the advancement of e-commerce, fintech, digital payments, Internet of Things, and the Industry 4.0 in general, everyone is leaving a digital footprint. So if you want to know how much each of these sometimes informal workers or informally employed workers is earning, you can often check with Yandex, Uber, Taxify, Upwork, Amazon Talk, AliExpress, Ozon, or any of this digital platform. Even in a lower middle income country like Cambodia or a slightly middle income country like Philippines, farmers here are also increasingly using digital platforms to actually sell their produce directly to consumers. So through these platforms, there is actually a lot of rich data that is now available, including demographics, behavioral patterns, and maybe even their spending, their saving patterns that can be captured and accessible once you have given the permission to access it. Next slide. So with so much data actually being available, how are social security organizations and other government entities such as the tax authority or the respective ministries such as the Ministry of Commerce, Finance, turning all this data from information into insights? In other words, the question is, how well are these agencies monitoring and evaluating their social protection program given the changing landscape of work? Next slide. So the honest answer here is not very well. And that's often because the approach to data is disjointed and ad hoc. More often than not, we see many different government agencies developing their own system. Sometimes one agency might buy many different systems for different social protection programs, and none of these systems actually speak to one another. So what is needed to tackle this new challenge of this informal digital economy and to leverage this rich source of information is actually for various government ministries and development partners to come together to think holistically about the data strategy and to systematically develop their data architecture to ensure that they are maximizing the value of the data available due to this Industry 4.0. So in fact, I think here's where a paradigm shift is actually needed, where instead of asking how do we get this data, how do we enroll this group of informal workers, how do we reach out to this village in the rural part of the country, we should instead be asking the question of who first. Who has this data? Who knows this group of workers? Who knows this village in the rural part of the country? And then we can ask, how can we work with them to serve this group of workers? Next slide. So these are two examples where social protection organizations and governments have worked together with technological companies to improve social security outcomes. So on the left, you see the collaboration between Gojek. Gojek is an Uber kind of company in Indonesia, and BPJS, the Health Social Security Organization, working together, supporting to ensure that not only just to enroll these drivers into the previous slide, not just to enroll the drivers into the social security scheme, but the drivers are also serving as agents to help enroll their customers and the community around them. The drivers are helping to educate and disseminate information on social protection to the riders. And the other example on the right is Grab. So Grab is a lifestyle company based in Southeast Asia. They also started with more of a travel, point-to-point travel business. So Grab is working very closely with the Inland Revenue Authority of Singapore. This is a good example of that on sharing of information, because considering the importance of tax-funded schemes and targeted schemes, that will be relevant to the informal workers and workers on other digital platforms. Next slide. So technology basically can improve access by allowing services anytime and anywhere. If you want a kebab at 11 p.m., you can go to the app, order it, get it delivered to your house. Similarly, if I just have a conversation about the importance of saving for retirement with my wife, I should be able to check how much I have in my pension fund, even though the office is closed. So in Cambodia, we are currently working with the National Social Security Fund on a modernization project. And one of these initiatives is to ensure that everyone can register and can access services anytime, anywhere. What we speak about is how more than 90% or maybe even 99% of the population has a Facebook or a Gmail account, but less than 1% has ever been to Facebook and Google headquarters in California, US. So what we want is for every Cambodian to be able to sign up and register with the Social Security Fund the moment they hear about it from a YouTube video, from an agent, and can sign up immediately sign up without having even have to step into a branch office. So next slide. So similarly, in Cambodia, Indonesia, Singapore, another important part about leveraging on data is to allow data sharing and data interoperability to improve and facilitate access to social protection. So this is done through data sharing between government agencies with the consent of the people, of the person. So in essence, people can give consent to government agencies to share the selected information across agencies. This doesn't just facilitate access by making it easier to register, but it also allows the various ministries and agencies and social protection organizations to share information to reach out to their target population, means testing, validation, monitoring, and evaluation of social protection programs. So we go to the last slide. So my experience working in this sector and in technology tells me that a lot of times the devil is in the details. What's desperately needed is that coherent strategy and roadmap that is jointly developed across government institutions and supported by multiple development partners. My greatest fear is when we start developing social protection systems that cater for each different group of informal economy workers, we will end up with a very disjointed, fragmented system that would never be able to cover everyone. So the other thing is also because our children are likely going to be working in jobs that do not even exist today. So how are we actually trying to create a system for every single new job if we do not know what these jobs are? So this is also where I want to bring in my example and my experience in Cambodia, where I currently work in, and is doing because it is doing well in a sense in the level of coordination. They have what we call the National Social Protection Council, whose core function is to coordinate efforts in social protection among various ministries, development partners, to avoid that fragmentation of the social protection system. The last point that I want to bring in this presentation is about leapfrogging. I think there is an opportunity for many developing countries to have to leapfrog. So I recall working for and consulting for one organization before and was advising them, and they told me they started to digitalize because they are now scanning documents and forms they are processing. I was completely horrified because that's not what we should be doing if we want to leapfrog in a world where the pace of change is faster. So to leapfrog, a big part of developing the strategy should be to address mega trends and challenges that will happen in the next 5 years and not the challenges that we are facing today. To put it simply, it is to come up with the solutions of the future and then adapt these solutions back to the realities of today. So to summarize, technology and informal employments, new form of employments, presents a unique opportunity for late starters to leapfrog and avoid the mistakes other developed countries make. So I think earlier in the IO resource package shared by Christina and Quinn, you will find a lot more examples of how Social Security is extended to workers in the informal economy. In the end, extending social protection to workers in the informal economy is really all about political will, technology, legal mechanism, policy innovations are all very effective tools to help support the strategy design. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Finn, for this very illustrative presentation, where you touch on so many things that are crucial in this region. I, for myself, will pick up a few that I see extremely relevant, and I'm certain that participants will come up with questions about other issues that they see relevant for themselves. One thing that you said is knowing how to get the data that you need. And very often, this is not something that is built in the design of data collection. Using or working together with social protection users to disseminate and reach out to new users is also a very good example of not only participatory information dissemination, but also a possibility to involve users into evaluation of the programs and of the system. And you were making a point about using technologies not only for data collection, but also for monitoring and evaluation of social protection programs. And this is something that we see being really a key in many of the countries worldwide, but also in this sub-region where we don't have enough information about the outcomes and the impact of social protection from a user perspective. So thank you very much, and I would like to invite webinar participants to ask questions. Okay, if there are no questions, then there is one from me before we move on to Nikita's presentation. Are there any estimates of the costs of use of technologies? Because very often we hear that this might be very costly, that governments need infrastructure to introduce new or existing technologies.
So this is indeed a very valid question. I think a lot, even you, bear in mind, I'm working now in Cambodia, which is a really lower middle income country, which just become a lower middle income country. And that has a very tight fiscal budget and has limited resources to invest into infrastructure. So this is the concern of cost is very real, but there is something that really helps in terms of managing the cost. Two things. One, this is an investment across time. A lot of the cost of investment is done across time, which you spread the cost out over many years, isn't as high as it is. The second thing is what I spoke about in the presentation. If each institution wants to develop their own system, that would be very costly, because you would have a system here for the Ministry of Commerce, you might have a system here for the social assistance schemes, you might have a system here for the social security schemes, pension schemes. So that would be very, very costly. So there's a reason why there is an important need to come for the various actors to actually come together to look at how they could fund this investment into a system that is supporting each other. So there is minimize the duplication of each system that is doing it. That would really reduce the cost of the investment. And I think that if a country like Cambodia can afford to do so, I think many other countries are in a much more better fiscal and privileged position to make that level of investment.
Thank you very much for this positive note on investments. And with that, we go to Professor Nikita Lyutov, who is a labor law specialist and who is going to tell us about developments or options for regulation of labor relations in the sub-region. Please.
Thank you, Yasmina. Well, I have looked at the list of participants and I see that the big majority of them is Russian speakers. So if organizers would forgive me, I would switch into Russian and it will be translated into English. Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Я постараюсь говорить с юридической точки зрения. Вот то, что мы сегодня слушали до этого, были более экономические или менеджерские перспективы на проблему.
The challenges from the managerial perspective, financial perspective. So I will speak.
Понимая, тем не менее, что существенная часть участников не юристы, соответственно, буду стараться делать это на человеческом языке, а не на юридическом. Вот. Тема, о которой меня попросили поговорить сегодня, это перспективы легализации платформенной занятости в Российской Федерации. Ну, прежде всего, перспективы формализации, если говорить более официально. Прежде всего, платформенная занятость как таковая – это не неформальная занятость. Это занятость в существенной части формализованная, но другое дело, что это то, что, ну вот тут англоязычный термин misclassified employment, то есть неправильно квалифицированная занятость, потому что в настоящее время она относится в Российской Федерации, да и в большинстве других стран мира к сфере гражданского права, хотя там есть сферы для применения именно нашего трудового права. Ну, прежде всего, масштаб явления. В Российской Федерации сейчас, по подсчетам социологов, это 5-я страна в мире по объему вот, платформенной занятости. То есть впереди нас Соединенные Штаты, Малайзия, Индия и Украина. Тоже вот интересен перечень этих лидирующих стран для того, чтобы понять, о чем мы вообще говорим, когда речь идет о платформенной занятости. Обычно возникает ассоциация, что платформенная занятость – это вот пик технологий, что-то такое вот инновационное, технологически продвинутое, и поэтому, соответственно, вот сходу обыватель это воспринимает как что-то вот такое вот IT, хай-тек, красивое и модное. На самом деле, ну, во-первых, уже перечень стран довольно пестрый, которые лидируют, да, вот по платформенной занятости, уже о чем-то говорит. Ну, а если посмотреть на просто вот статистику, какие виды работы выполняются в рамках платформенной занятости, в России будут с отрывом лидировать, особенно сейчас в условиях пандемии, водители и курьеры, плюс есть еще сектор мелких бытовых услуг. Ну, например, есть такое популярное такое приложение «Юду», когда люди просят платформенных работников вот сами формулируют задания, и, соответственно, самого разного рода услуги могут выполняться. Вот. О типах правовых подходов мы недавно с коллегами, с Еленой Герасимовой и с Марией Алексинской сделали англоязычную статью, такую очень короткую, буквально на 1,5 страницы. Называется тип статьи «Dispatch» для Comparative Labor Law and Policy Journal. Вот я кинул ссылку, можно посмотреть в чате общий такой обзор того, как это видно с правовой точки зрения. В отношении конкретно немножко более узко регулирования труда вот одного из наиболее ведущих профессиональных секторов мы делали уже юридический анализ вместе с Илоной Вайтковской, которая тоже присутствует в числе наших участников сегодня. Смотрели на то, как регулируется труд водителей на платформе Яндекс, это аналог российский Uber, ну и Uber, который на российском рынке просто принадлежит Яндексу. Вот с точки зрения того, ну, как это, собственно говоря, регулируется и какая практика есть в этом отношении. Если посмотреть на отношения между платформой и водителями, то можно найти очень много признаков трудовых отношений. То есть в чем в основном эти признаки заключаются? В том, что платформа говорит водителю, как должен выполняться труд. То есть это не отношения просто по аренде машины. Это может оформляться как аренда машины, но в итоге даются четкие инструкции, как должна выполняться работа. Если водитель отказывается от выполнения задачи, его могут рейтинг понизить, то есть это своего рода дисциплинарная санкция, а потом и отключить от платформы. И, ну, то есть довольно много таких признаков. Сейчас нет времени на детальный анализ. Ну, очень это похоже на трудовые отношения. И что очень важно, об этом уже сегодня все докладчики успели сказать, вот труд таких водителей – это неустойчивая занятость, то, что по-английски называется precarious employment. Никакой стабильности. Ну, вот, смена водителя Яндекса – это нормально 16 часов, причем за эти 16 часов он может не заработать вообще денег, особенно в условиях, когда движение сейчас ограничено. То есть просто проездить 16 часов и уйти, то, что называется, в ноль. Вот. При этом никакой стабильности занятости, при этом вас могут отключить. То есть это вот явно клиент трудового права, но пока находящийся вне охвата. То есть с точки зрения налогового права, пожалуйста, налоги с этого всего платятся. А с точки зрения защитной функции трудового права, тут как раз полный пробел. Пока вот мы видели 2 судебных дела, которые рассматривались по искам водителей в отношении признания факта наличия трудовых отношений в России. Оба дела водителями были проиграны. В обоих случаях суды не рассматривали того, что принято называть принципом приоритета фактов. Они смотрели не на фактическую сторону отношений, а на то, как это оформлено. То есть мы видим гражданско-правовой договор, и мы не анализируем того, что на самом деле он скрывает нечто похожее на трудовые отношения. И в обоих случаях суды отказались признать эти отношения трудовыми. Причем интересно, что 2 года назад, в конце мая 2018 года, Верховный суд Российской Федерации принял постановление Пленума, которое касается малого бизнеса и микропредприятий, в котором делается разъяснение, что судам при квалификации отношений в качестве трудовых или гражданско-правовых следует как раз ориентироваться на не просто формальный документооборот между сторонами, а на приоритет фактов. Вот. Но суды, нижестоящие, считают это для себя излишним или затруднительным, и на практике то, что вот мы видим, пока этого не происходит. Каковы перспективы легализации, каковы перспективы изменения, собственно говоря, правового регулирования, которое сейчас есть у нас в стране? Ну, вот буквально сейчас лидирующая фракция в Государственной Думе, в Нижней Палате нашего парламента, «Единая Россия», вносит пакет предложений, который касается изменений трудового законодательства в части регулирования нетипичной занятости. Наш университет имени Кутафина для них подготовил в декабре прошлого года набор идей, что в этом отношении можно сделать, в отношении дистанционного труда, в отношении того, что называется employee sharing, job sharing, в отношении в том числе и платформенной занятости, в отношении баланса рабочего времени и времени отдыха вот в нетипичных трудовых отношениях. Довольно много вещей, и они для себя выделили, вот рассмотрев эти наши предложения, 3 очереди документов, вот 3 очереди инициатив, которые они рассматривают. Вот те, которые в первую очередь прямо сейчас, те, которые в ближайшее время будут дорабатываться, и те, которые они поняли плохо и будут о них еще думать и пытаться как-то понять, что с этим делать. Вот в первую очередь того, что уже сейчас будет вноситься, это нормы, которые касаются, и тоже это актуально для нынешней ситуации с коронавирусной инспекцией, то, что касается дистанционной занятости. В частности, будет упрощаться документооборот между сторонами, будут, ну, по крайней мере, пока в проекте, который они предлагают, введено право работника быть офлайн, знаменитое, вот в отношении дистанционных работников оно планируется. И вот это, некоторые другие вещи, это вот в первую очередь то, что предлагается. То, что касается платформенной занятости, оказалось в 3-й очереди. То есть то, что нуждается в дальнейшем осмыслении, они не понимают пока, как к этому подходить. И, соответственно, вот если мы говорим о перспективах формализации с точки зрения, то есть не просто формализации. Сейчас платформенная занятость, можно сказать, что формализована, да, с точки зрения налогового права, гражданского права, но формализована не так, как следовало бы с точки зрения социальной защиты. Да. То есть каковы перспективы введения этого в русло трудового права. Но не хочется говорить, что отдаленно, и хочется верить, что все-таки вот в результате некоторого еще раунда обсуждений с депутатами Государственной Думы, социальными партнерами придет понимание того, что это очень социально значимая проблема. Работающих в этом секторе очень много. Это неустойчивая занятость. Они уже устраивают неформальные акции протеста, и это, наверное, только начало ситуации. Вот. И, ну, наверное, мы все-таки будем двигаться к тому, чтобы защищать таких трудящихся в широком смысле слова, потому что они пока не работники с точки зрения трудового права. Ну вот такова ситуация в России.
Thank you very much for this this overview. Sorry, was there something else that you were?
No, I just waiting for the simultaneous translation. I don't hear obviously the translation, but I was assuming that it is going on.
Mm-hmm. Finished.
So if there will be some questions, I would be glad to answer them.
It's much appreciated that you brought the issue of platform workers and in particular taxi drivers. This is one of the most visible issues everywhere in our sub-region. And also the issue of position of tax authorities. And we see some attempts in some countries towards shifting or how shall I say, changing the notion of social insurance contributions and shifting them towards tax contributions. So we have a couple of countries in sub-region that are reducing the traditional way of contributions making and saying that the portion of the personal income tax paid by everyone goes towards social insurance. It would be interesting to hear perceptions or experiences from our participants and from our colleagues that have more global overview about this.
So it's the question not to me, but for the broad audience, to everyone.
But for you too.
Well, the question you're asking is what are the tax authorities' approach in Russia regarding the social security payments of these workers, not employees, but workers. Well, in Russia, it is such deductions are made even for civil law contracts in such situation if the relations are formalized. So from this perspective, this is somehow workable for them. But other issues, I look more at the situation from labor law rather than social security law perspective. That they have nothing like job security, stability, a limitation of working time, occupational safety and health, issues of liability. For example, if we are talking about a taxi driver, that if accident happens, it's no any kind of liability or responsibility by the platform. The driver is left with the police, with health issues, with everything on him or herself. So these are the major problems for them. And I don't think, well, obviously the issue of payments to social security is very essential here, but kind of second after the things that I said.
Yes, I can maybe also come in and thank you very much, Nikita, for this kind of very important, making this link between the recognition of the employment relationship and the important fight against the misclassification of employment relationships, and making the link also between what we see in terms of the labor protection part and in terms of the social protection part, the social security part. I mean, from our perspective, I mean, we see that many countries are thinking about reducing the employer's part of social security contributions, shifting some of those responsibilities to the tax system. And we see that in a very critical way, because essentially it deprives the social security system from an important part of the resources, because I mean, it's not that in most cases, it's not that there will be a full compensation from the tax system. So if the responsibilities are shifted, also the financial responsibilities are shifted entirely to workers, this is very problematic, and this is also not in line with international social security instruments which have been adopted by governments and workers and employers, and which clearly say that employers have the responsibility to cover at least half of the total social insurance contributions. So I think there might be, in some cases, I mean, there might be a need for adjustment, but in general, it's very important also that employers really assume their responsibility. And this includes not only the responsibility in terms of occupational safety and health and the other responsibilities that come with an employment relationship, but that also come with a responsibility when it comes to social security. And it's not a coincidence that this belongs together, because, I mean, for example, if we look at the issue of occupational safety and health and the important role that employers are playing with regard to preventing or taking all the measures that are necessary to preventing accidents, for example, I think there's a very clear relationship also with regard to that
Yes.
and the social security contributions dimension to it.
Totally agree with you.
Yes, yeah, and I think this is yet another argument to really thinking about more about making sure that workers in all types of employment are adequately covered. Also to reduce this gap that we currently see, where those who are in a recognized employment relationship are being considered as too expensive. I mean, with this argument regarding the labor cost.
Sorry, considered as, I didn't hear.
Yes.
Considered as, I just lost the word.
Yes, yeah.
Considered too expensive.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. So where we have a big gap, I mean, for employers, basically, I mean, they're thinking about how, in which way of employing workers. Do they employ them as a kind of formal employees, or do they employ them as kind of a contract workers, however you call it, trying to employ them as self-employed and shifting the responsibility to the individual workers. And I think if we manage to reduce this gap and have a more equal playing field, and I think it's also thinking about a more level playing field when we think, especially when we're thinking, for example, of for taxi drivers. I think it's very evident between when we think about a level playing field between the digital platforms and those economic units and enterprises operating in the kind of what we call traditional economy. So I think we also need to make sure that it's not the digital platforms that can evade in some way or another the regulations, but that there is also a level playing field between the economic actors in the traditional economy and those in the digital economy. And I think this is also where there is much more efforts needed with regard to improving the regulations and adapting them to the current situation, which is extremely important. And I mean, we see, for example, in the European Union, we see quite some progress with regard to the European social pillars. They have really, specified the objective of covering workers in all types of employment. And I think this is an important step forward, but it really needs the political will behind it to really make that happen in a way that is really that is effective.
Which is always a problem.
Yes, yeah.
Totally agree with you.
Yeah. So thank you, Christina. It's political will, but also something that you mentioned earlier. It's also trust in institutions and trust of institutions to the population, that the population will, or the workers will, and employers will make contributions. So somehow we see that, and the other issue that we see also in the region is this a strive towards, very individualistic approaches, and everybody out there making life for themselves. So this, in some ways, lack of solidarity, and hopefully the crisis has or will in some ways contribute to more solidarities between people. But then the question remains, will this attempt to be more inclusive, expand towards workers in formal economy, particularly if they're in the jobs that are seeing, you know, jobs for people with low education and migrant workers. So these are, I think, issues that we will keep encountering in our discussions in the sub-region as well as elsewhere.
Yeah.
And here we have two questions in the chat. One was if there was a support package for labor migrant, and then the other one was more comment on situation with social insurance for health in Russia, and this move towards contributions deducted from taxes, or taxes being seen as contributions. So maybe, yes, please go ahead.
Is there any, now I'm just reading back this chat, is there any development of social support package envisaged for labor migrants? What we do have now, if the question refers to the situation of coronavirus limitations, the only thing which is done for labor migrants is that the right to stay in the country. There are two things which are actually done. The permission to stay in the country if the visa has expired, or the permission to stay in the country if it's visa-free situation, but permission for work. And the second is the relief from the payment for so-called patents for work. The simplified permissions or now is temporarily suspended. So they are only permitted to stay in the situation when they are not permitted to leave the country, actually, when the transportation is just stopped. And the second is this relieving from payments. There are very serious issues for the situations when labor migrants lose the opportunity to work, and there may be a grave issue when this migrant worker cannot pay for living, or I mean the rent in the places where they live. And well, you would naturally expect the country to intervene in certain situation and to provide some place for them, but this is not made. It was only made, there were some cases on casual basis when regional authorities intervened in the situation when the migrant workers have been left without any means to live, and there were assistance for them, just provision of some place to live, some food, and then the transportation back to their country. But nothing has been done on the federal level in this situation, and this is a kind of grave situation. I know that different nationalities cooperate with the diasporas, and they gather some funds and help each other, but obviously this must be done with the participation of state. And it seems that, well, the only thing which country offers is that we allow you to stay, which, well, in such situation is out of question because they have to stay. They have no other choice. So the second question is I think it was a kind of note rather than the question, is about the professional income tax, that self-employed pay. Yes, this is the thing that I didn't have time to talk about, that there is a very popular scheme in Russia of a bogus self-employment, when the workers, not employees, but workers, in the broad sense, they have to register as either individual entrepreneur or self-employed. As for the individual entrepreneurs, this is, for example, popular scheme in cinematography when actors, directors, and other staff have to register as individual entrepreneurs. This leads to simplified taxes, and therefore social security is not paid, but they think that in short term they economize their money, and they don't rely much on the state pensions because they are very low and comparable with the incomes, and it wouldn't provide them the 40% of subsistence which is envisaged by Convention 102. So in this situation with individual entrepreneurs, they may they actually look as employees, and the nature of the relation is the employment relations. But because of the fact that Mr. or Mrs. Ivanov, let's say, has been registered as the individual entrepreneur and assigned the contract as the performer of work being the individual entrepreneur Ivanov, the special tax regime is applied, and also no employment relations and no protection for the employee. The second scheme is self-employed, which also simplified taxation, which is written here in this comment. This is right. This is a kind of experimentary scheme, which is performed in the number of regions, including Moscow, since the last year, if I'm not lost in time. I think, yes, since the last year. And the idea of the scheme, this is what tax ministry has announced, that it would be prohibited for the employers to transform the employees into this self-employed. The problem is, well, and it is interesting also that Ministry of Labor didn't take any attention to this scheme. They were not bothered with the situation that this self-employment status may take the employees from the formal labor market into the civil law, actually, and this wasn't a matter of concern for them. But taxation ministry said that we are not allowing the taxpayers to switch all the workers to this scheme. But it may be done in the matter of time. You dismiss an employee, and after a certain amount of time, you hire a new one, but you only de facto hire this person. And in reality, from formal point of view, you conclude the civil law contract with this self-employed person, which means no employment relations, and the social security issues is the matter of concern of this person. So yeah, that's the problem. And
thank you for pointing out this problem, and it really is not only in Russia. We see it in many other countries in sub-region. I'm very conscious of the time. I think we have passed over our schedule, and I would like each one of you presenting to give for the end one sentence where you say how you see the way forward. What is the possible way forward? And please also take into account a question that is in chat. And the question says, do you think the informal workers or the informal economy contributes or has its own advantages in increasing the level of welfare? We hear that sometimes, that informal employment contributes to the welfare. So it would be good to comment on this. Thank you. And we can start with Nikita, Finn, Quinn, and end with Christina.
So the backwards. Okay. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It was very interesting to listen to all the presenters and to take part in the discussion of the issue. As for Yasmina's quotation of the thesis that the informal economy is also an important thing which benefits the economy in general, well, it depends on probably the level of informality in each market and in each society. When I was, for example, in South Africa, I was listening to the concerns of my colleagues there, saying that International Labour Organization is too much concentrated on the issue of formalization, ignoring the fact that in the developing countries, and they were not only speaking about South Africa, they were showing more kind of shouting example of India with the level of informality like 90% or something like this. They were saying that if we apply the approach on radical formalization of economy, we will just kill the economy, and for them it may be the choice between the no employment at all or informal employment rather than formal and informal. Well, it is all the matter of kind of gradual and accurate, I would say, development. I think obviously the first step that should be made is having some economy. Informal is better than nothing. But then we all understand that informal is obviously much worse than formal by many reasons, and social security is major in this regard. So yes, I think well, for Russia, this is the same thing. We have not Indian level of informality. It's the numbers are very different, from 20% to 50 and more. Difficult to say really, but it is very unmeasurable issue actually, the informality. But yes, we should. And in our case, the tax ministry is a kind of driver of formalization, which is a pity because in our constitution it is stated that Russia is the social state, and I think the well-being of people is much bigger priority than the tax picture, purely accounting issue. But this is the list that we have, and at least this is the tool that we can rely on to a certain extent. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for emphasizing the constitutional provision and goal of having social states. Finn, please, one sentence. Oh, I think Finn might be at another meeting, so he might not be able to join us. Quinn?
Yes, sorry actually for turning off the screen. My connection was a bit bad. So yeah, to conclude, formal and informal, also echoing what Nikita said, is really not a black and white. So it's more a continuum. And as we've also seen in the COVID-19 crisis, a lot of workers in developing countries can actually very, very quickly fall into the informal economy because of different reasons. And social protection can be a very important tool to protect those workers and also facilitate their formalization. And it's important that countries really now kind of think about the future and look forward and think about how to really ensure social protection coverage for workers in all forms of employment. And social protection plays an important role, but it has to be integrated with a lot of other policy areas. As we have heard before, tax policies are very important, skills, care policies, and etc. Thank you. Over to Christina.
Well, there's not much I could add to these excellent points. I think it's really important to really put the question of protection first, and really making sure that the protection comes first, and then I mean, I know that there is this discussion about the formalization, which is often led in quite a controversial way. But I think the basic tenet is that's really that informality is not inevitable. And informality in some way is also created by certain difficulties of really formulating and implementing the legal and the regulatory frameworks to enforce it. And that there is an issue really when we go back to the basic tenets of a social contract, where it's really about, on the one hand, making sure that everyone is protected, but also on the other hand, and I think this is the other side of the medal, as ensuring that all those who can contribute to the financing through the tax system or through contributions actually also played their part in doing that. And I think if we go back to these really fundamental principles, I think that really leads us to really trying to well, put the priorities on the protection, but then at the same time also work towards a kind of a gradual transition to the formal economy. And I think this is the only way that we can ensure that the system is actually, on the one hand, sustainable, but then on the other hand also equitable. And I think this really goes together. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Christina. I apologize to everybody for webinar going quite some time longer than we initially thought we would take, but it is a comprehensive topic, as the concluding observations are showing us. Dear colleagues, before you leave, let's allow everybody's photos screens to be shared so we can take a photograph. That's first thing. The second thing is all the materials will be available in Russian and in English on ILO Moscow website, but also on the link that is in Christina's and Quinn's presentation about resource package on informality. We can also send you by email directly the translated handbook. And finally, please, if you have questions, specific questions, please send them to Marina, who has been, I think, in contact with you if you need to send them in Russian language, or to me, Christina and Quinn, and we will try to see, and Nikita, obviously, and we will try to see how we can respond to you and support you in the interventions that you are trying to implement or design. So thank you very much. Have a very good afternoon, evening, and we will be in touch with information about a next topic and dates. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can we have some participants or not
I think
before they all leave?
Additional settings. It's the matter of settings, I think.
Yeah. Okay, I think let's leave, and what we have, we have. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and it was really, really interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for organizing.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.